Right.
dialogue. And I think it's, it's good to basically be like Alex Jones in the sense of we want to keep a fellowship and keep a common dialogue, between all of us, because at the end of the day, we're all working towards the same fight, which is there is a global power structure that we believe exists. And at the end of the day, whether or not it is of a human or alien extraterrestrial origin, it's a very real conspiracy. And so I think we have to keep our minds open in this regard and at least hear both sides, in all arguments. So towards that end, I wanted to start out just by talking with you and getting a better sense, of your history, because to come out and to become the most notorious advocate of the reptilian conspiracy, obviously it indicates a lot of insights on your part. I wanted to know where this began in your journey, your awakening to a higher dimension of reality.
Well, I think, Sean, that, people talk about the alternative media, but it's a vast spectrum. It's not one thing. And there's one end of the alternative media that is almost imperceptible from the mainstream media. And it goes right across the spectrum to a point where you find people like me who are questioning every aspect of what we've been told to believe in. And for me, if you don't explore those deeper levels beyond what mainstream society finds acceptable or believable at first hearing, then you're never, ever going to get to the cause of what we're exposing. You will only ever be looking at the symptom. Funnily enough, that's what mainstream medicine does. Mainstream medicine sees a symptom and it focuses in on the symptom and it tries to relieve the symptom. But because it doesn't go for the cause, the symptom will return and the whole thing motors on and on and on and on. And in a very similar way, if we do not start breaking through the alternative media's limitations of where it will go, then we're not going to get to the cause of this global conspiracy. Because, I find it quite, amusing, head shaking, to see people in the alternative media who will complain when the mainstream dismisses them by reflex action as being a nutter or someone who's kind of, very strange and shouldn't be listened to. And why do the mainstream media do that? They do that by reflex action because their perception of reality is so narrow and so concrete-like that going any further, the idea that there is a network conspiring to bring about a particular end of human enslavement, that to them is ridiculous because their perception will not expand to encompass that possibility. It's interesting that for me, one of the greatest forms of human control is the suppression of the sense of the possible. Because once you have a situation where you have persuaded people that only this is possible, then anything that you're doing outside of that sense of the possible will be rejected by reflex action. They can't be doing that. It's not possible. So hijacking the sense of the possible is very, very important, indeed vital to this whole global game.
Would you say that's what you, in the sense that's what you were doing when you first came out? Was it 91 when you basically came on public television and said you were the Son of God? That's basically breaking all the boundaries of possible and impossible because you're questioning, just in that sentence alone, the meaning of God. You see?
Yeah, what I was saying there, Sean, and I was in such a massive state of awakening at that time, I hardly knew what my name was for about 3 months. But what I was saying in there in my own way is that we're all expressions of the infinite awareness that is everything. Thus, we're all, if you want to use that symbolic language, sons and daughters or whatever you want to call it, of God or the infinite, as I would call it. So when you are complaining that you are being dismissed by reflex action by the mainstream media, it's kind of interesting to see that when someone goes further than you're prepared to go, further than where your perception of possibility is prepared to go, then you respond to those people in exactly the way that you complain about others here respond to you. And what I think is absolutely vital. You see, perception comes from the information received and how we process that information. So if the mainstream media give you that much information, then you are going to make your perceptions of possibility, reality, who you are, what's happening in the world from that. But if you're given that or wider, suddenly your perceptions of possibility of what's going on in the world, the nature of reality change, because you now got a greater access to a greater sense of the possible by a greater spectrum of information. This is important because when the mainstream media give you that narrow band to manipulate perception, though most of them do it because their perception's been manipulated to start with, it's the blind leading the blind in so many ways. But when you're in the alternative media and you are dealing with a wider spectrum of information, if you make it unpleasant for people to go further than you are, then you are a policeman, a police officer of perception, just as much as the mainstream is a police officer of perception. Your perception may be a bit wider than the mainstream, but you're still going through the same process. And this is all I ask. This is what this television station we're starting very, very soon called The People's Voice is all about. It's to say, let's have the free flow of information. Let people have the respect, say what they think, and to give their opinion and to give their research without fear of ridicule and condemnation for the crime, and that's what it's become, in the alternative as well as the mainstream, the crime of being different. Throughout history, it's the different that has moved the cutting edge of human awareness and human perception. Because the same will never do that, because it's going round and round and round in the same box, if you like, and therefore it's not moving anything. It's just repeating what is already known.
Right.
And it's the ones that go into the unknown or seek to explore the unknown that push the cutting edge on from that. So when we are trying to show and understand what's going on, you cannot understand what is happening in the world purely by what appears to be happening in the world, because that's the symptom. Banking scams, political scams, engineered wars. To understand the deeper levels of where this is coming from, we have to understand the nature of reality itself. And it's an interesting point how little in the mainstream and most of the alternative, the nature of reality itself is explored. Because if we don't start to get a grasp of the actual nature of the world that we live in, how on earth can we understand what's happening in it?
Right.
It's like sitting in a movie theater trying to understand why those pictures are appearing on the screen without the realization that there's a projector at the back that is making them appear on that screen. We have to go into those areas, otherwise we are only researching and communicating what we can see rather than what is making what we see manifest in the world of experience.
Well, speaking of that, I mean, as you mentioned, we have banking scandals, we have a potential economic slow motion collapse taking place, right? We keep raising the debt for the United States, for example, but meanwhile the dollar is in a continuous crisis. Potentially, you know, the destruction of the American empire. We've overstretched ourselves militarily. How do you see that fit into your picture of, you know, the global scheme, let's say? Is the idea to sink America like Atlantis was sunk in a sense? I mean, what's really taking place then?
Well, there's the much deeper level of this, which is where is it all coming from, and then there's the still a deep level compared with the mainstream, but the level that we can see. And on that level, I've been saying for years, Sean, that what is happening in America is being used to destroy America. Because there's two things you really need to know, even on this what can be seen level to really get a very fast grasp of many things that appear bewildering and unexplainable. One, where is this network trying to take the world? Two, what are the methods of manipulation they use to take us there? Once people get a grasp of that, they can go from 0 to 100 very quickly in their many. Crucial to that constant increasing of your power over the many is the centralization of decision making. The more diversity of decision making we have, the less chance any central point or group has of controlling human life in any great or fine detail, because there's just too many points of decision making for you to control. What you want is as few points of decision making as possible, so in the end there are a few people sitting around deciding what is happening globally. And that's the reason that they are moving us towards this structure of world government, world central bank controlling all global finance, world currency, which is a fundamental tool of control, and the world army, which is designed to impose the will of the world government. And we have a de facto world army now with NATO and the UN Security Council and all that stuff, and the G20. All these are proxy and pseudo world governments, world armies moving towards the goal that they want.
Even when Obama says that we're moving into Libya, for example, because of NATO, because of basically the NATO treaty supersedes congressional authority. So you see more and more the international scope of law making and law and order.
Exactly. That's the technique that I call the totalitarian tiptoe, where you go in steps. You know you're going to Z or Z, as you say in America, and you're at A, but you know if your steps are too big, the change is so great so quickly that people look up from the game show or the sports and they go, what's going on? So you do it in steps that are as big as you can get away with, but not so big that you alert too many people of the fact that there's a pattern here. And so this stepping stones technique is massively effective in moving towards a goal, while each individual step is presented and promoted as completely unconnected to all the other steps.
Well, that's why most people were even oblivious in America. Most Americans are probably oblivious of the shutdown. The government was shut down for 2 weeks, and I think probably half the country didn't even realize it. That does indicate a tremendous shift in the consciousness from even the 60s, 70s time period to now. But what you're saying is fundamentally it's an old notion of the New World Order. I mean, that conspiracy was even talked about by Carroll Quigley in the in the 60s in his book Tragedy and Hope. I mean, this is a Georgetown professor who wrote about the centralization of power, the desire for the Anglo-American empire, of concentration of wealth and banking. I mean, this is an old conspiracy, but it seems like your edition has been understanding the Babylonian bankster side of it, the Babylonian Brotherhood, as you call it. So the idea that this is something that's more ancient than just the British Empire or the American Empire.
Yeah. I'm very keen to come to that. I just finish that point about America. That question you asked about what's happening with the debt ceiling and everything. If you want a world government dictating to every country, you cannot have any superpowers with the financial and military might to say no to you. You can't because you're not a world government. So the idea has been to systematically destroy America financially and eventually militarily, so that it can be absorbed into this world government structure. So when you see, Sean, that the unbelievable amounts of money that are spent on the American military, when the American economy is in, like so many around the world, is in such a state and people are living in tent cities and they're losing their jobs, there is no sensible moral correlation between the suffering of so many Americans and places like Detroit and the amount of money that's spent on the American military. Now, this is the Rubicon. This is the line we need to cross to understand what's going on. That is not the American military. That is the military controlled by this hidden cabal which is using the American military to play out its own agenda. And thus, when we see AFRICOM and all these comms structures that are being created, where the world is being broken up into different military units of the American military, that is merely a stepping stone to that structure being handed to the world government as a world army. It's not the American side of it is merely the stepping stone. That's not the end. And so at the same time, you have ludicrous financial decisions being taken where, I mean, the debt ceiling keeps being raised and keeps being raised and keeps being raised. I mean, the question is, where do you think this ends? How do you think this plays out in the end? When we drown in unimaginable debt that exceeds anything like the ability to service the interest, never mind pay back the debt. Where does this lead? It leads to the eventual collapse of the American economy and thus the world economy. So what we're seeing, Sean, when we see the debt ceiling breached again, and it's always the same, isn't it? Oh, the debt ceiling's coming. Oh, and they have this pantomime, this farce, this drama. And you know that at the last minute, oh, pew, we come to an agreement, and they push it on. Every one of those debt ceiling breaches is a stepping stone towards the demise of the American economy, coldly and calculatedly. So they're using America to destroy America because they want to absorb America into the world government structure, which is what they're doing in the European Union, where I sit now. They are bringing the economies of Europe increasingly to their knees so they can be absorbed into this world government structure. Because alongside the totalitarian tiptoe is another technique that I've been describing now for nearly 25 years as problem, reaction, solution. Create the problem, get the public to respond at stage 2 with the reaction of outrage, of fear, of do something, and then at stage 3 you offer the solutions to the problems you covertly created. So what happened in 2008 is they crashed the world economy in a cold, calculated way again. It started way back with Greenspan in the latter part of Reagan-Bush, and came up through to Boy Bush and into Bernanke. Were in the financial industry, were constantly deleted, and the end had to be this massive crash that we had. But if you who are orchestrating the crash also own the governments that are going to respond to the crash, you know before you crash the economy that the bailout is coming from the government to your banking system. And what this is doing, and this is why dots have to be connected, what is actually happening is a fantastic transfer of wealth through those bailouts from the people, through the government, to the banking system. But again, it's understanding what is the outcome that they want. And the outcome ultimately is a society which was well illustrated in the movie The Hunger Games, where you had a tiny, mega, breathtakingly rich and wealthy few in the capitals dictating and being served by a slave society. Now, if you are moving the world towards that, then there is a limit on the potential of transferring wealth from the public through the governments to the banks and the less than 1%, because there is a what used to be known in America as a middle class, where there are still people in some areas doing quite well. They've not struggled like some of the people in general. They might run medium-sized companies and all that stuff. But what they want is them as part of this mega poor. If you're not part of this less than 1%, they want your wealth too. Now, we saw those targeted. I mean, of course, the middle class in America have been targeted by systematically, again, moving jobs into Mexico and the Far East, etc., and crashing the America's industrial base. But what happened in Cyprus when we had the first major, what they now call bail-in, was the first step in the stepping stones, the totalitarian tiptoe, to targeting the wealth of those that are doing well, that are pretty well, they're very comfortable and all the rest of it. They may have, good businesses, but they're not part of the less than 1%. And that is the process of, instead of going through governments to the banking system goes directly to your bank account and takes what it says it needs to bail out the banks. And once we started that bail-in through Cyprus, don't care. This is why we must come together. If these fault lines of divide and rule, and one of them is income bracket. I'm doing okay, you're poor, you're in a tent. I don't have to think about you, it's not my problem. Well, I tell you, ladies and gentlemen, it is your problem because they want your wealth too. And we have to start coming together and saying that someone else's injustice is our injustice. Because if we don't do that, then injustice will knock on our door eventually. And this is what's happening with the financial system. They're now starting to target those that felt that they were immune from the crash. And I saw a graph, Sean, just finally on this point, of wealth ownership in America. And you'd think it would go up something like that. It went very low, a little bit higher. Now we're in the middle class now. And then suddenly it leapt up when it got to less than 1%. In fact, the peak at that point was so high that it went off the page and they had to put the top of the graph beside it in this graphic. We are so far on the road now to this Hunger Games society, because if you have money, if you have wealth, then you have choice in the face of what is going on in the world. Take that away, and now authority is your only means of food, your only means of drink, your only means of survival. That now starts dictating to you. And that's the society we're moving towards very, very fast.
But again, I think a lot of people are recognizing that more and more, that there's this tremendous inequality that's growing. There's these policies that are detrimental to middle class and under, the middle class and under. But still, the notion of a global conspiracy of old elite families, let's say the Babylonian Brotherhood, as you call it, is harder for people to grasp, I think. How did you come to this understanding of that brotherhood and that elite?
Well, everything that I've done over the last 25 years has been cumulative. You don't pick up one piece of information on it. There are some that shout out at you. You put it together piece by piece by piece by piece, and then you see the tapestry, then you see the picture form. And if you go back into the ancient world and you look at what they were saying about reality, or what they were saying about how the world is structured, then you find a very, very common theme. And that is of a force which is invariably described as a parasitic force, which is manipulating humanity from the realms of the unseen. Now, the realms of the unseen are virtually everything that exists in all reality, because this is why I said earlier, Sean, that we have to start understanding the nature of reality to understand the nature of this conspiracy. Because I'm looking into this room now, this newsroom of the People's Voice in London, and most people doing so would think that they were seeing everything there is in the space that I'm looking at. Not at all, not even nearly at all. What I'm looking at is a tiny, tiny range of frequency called by scientists visible light, which is so tiny it's almost laughable. As someone very rightly said, humans are basically blind in the sense of what they can see compared with what there is to see. So if we think of this reality as like a television channel, like a holographic television channel, we're only seeing the frequency that channel operates on. Mainstream science says, and I think they're underestimating it, that of that which exists as mass and matter in this universe that they can identify or think they can, the electromagnetic spectrum is 0.005% of what exists. Some people say it's higher, but not by much. The electromagnetic spectrum is not what we conceive, and yet that's what 0.005% they say of what exists in this universe. Visible light is only a fraction of the 0.005%, and that's all we can see. So we are operating on a particular frequency band, just like a radio station and a television station in the analog system. And therefore, that's all we can see. If you tune to, in the analog system, to a certain television station, that's what you get. You don't get all the others. You get that one because that is tuning you into its frequency. We, through these bodies, these decoding systems, as I call it, biological computers, we are decoding a certain frequency range of information, and thus we are perceiving that. But outside of that is an infinity of possibility, an infinity of other forms of life that take a very different form to us. And some of them are just energetic. They don't have a form. They're just awareness. And when you, again, look at these ancient writings, they talk about this parasitical force, and they talk about it in incredibly similar terms. For instance, in 1945, a sealed glass jar was found in Egypt. And when it was opened, they found that it was writings from a group of people called the Gnostics, the pre-Christian Gnostics. And the Gnostics were a people, it was actually really a belief system, who were involved in running the Great Library at Alexandria, which was this fantastic depository of ancient knowledge and ancient accounts, which was destroyed by the Roman Church. These writings, because they'd been in this glass jar seal, they reckon they were probably go back to about 100 AD or something like that. They've not been tampered with. They've not had their what they say changed to fit the political desire of the authority of the day. And 1/5 of these writings are about a non-human, energetic, parasitical force that they call archons. When you read what these writings say, these Gnostic writings say about the archons, it is a mirror of what the Islamic belief system says. And in fact, it's not just Islamic, it's pre-Islamic. Islam picked it up, but this is pre-Islamic in terms of what I'm going to say. They talk about the jinn. And these are energetic entities which manipulate humanity from the unseen realms, outside of visible light and our ability to perceive them, but we can feel their influence. Down to the fact that the jinn was said to have been created from smokeless fire, and the archons were said by the Gnostics to have been created from luminous fire. This is how close it gets. Then you look at
energy state, basically.
Yeah. Then you look at what was said by a Central American shaman called Don Juan Matus in the Carlos Castaneda books from the 1960s and 1970s. I think it got Castaneda was even writing into the 1990s. And he describes a force, a parasitical manipulating force, which he called the flyers. When you look at what he said about the flyers, it's what the pre-Islamic and Islamic world say about the jinn. It's what the Gnostics said about the archons. And so you build this in the realm of the Zulus in South Africa. They talk about the Chitahuri, which they describe in similar terms. And what's interesting, Sean, this is a real key thing, Sean, because these entities, which people describe today as experiencing in abductions and what have you, they didn't arrive today. They've been here all along through what we call known human history. So when humans were knocking rocks together, they were still here at a high level of awareness and a high level of potential, high compared with humans who are systematically kept in the dark. And all the way through history, you describe, this is not the only form, you know, people connect me to talking about reptilians. Reptilians is a major expression of this parasitical force in the form it takes. But it's not the only one. There's lots of others. And of course, dominating the abduction descriptions of people today in what we call the modern world are entities that take a reptilian form and entities that take what they call the greys, the classic grey alien form. Well, what's absolutely stunning is when you read the accounts found in this sealed glass jar in 1945 in Egypt, they say that the archons, this in their prime form, energetic force that takes form, they describe them as taking form most often as a reptilian form, and in a form that, to summarize, looks like a grey fetus. Mm-hmm. And it talks about the way these archons in their various forms and energetic form parasitically feed off human energy. It's their life force, and how they possess the human emotional and thought processes to impose a sense of reality, a sense of perception that wouldn't normally be there. And you know, again, we have to understand the nature of reality. What is this possession parasitical process? The body is a holographic projection of an energetic information field. The energetic information field on one level is what we call the auric field. It's an electromagnetic field, and it can be photographed and it can be technologically measured. Now, these parasitical entities are operating at that electromagnetic and beyond to the deeper realms of waveform. That's the level they're operating at. So what they're doing is not possessing the body or the brain. They are, in frequency terms, making a frequency electromagnetic connection with the auric field. And through that, they are feeding off that energy. They feed off low vibrational emotional energy. And thus, the more that society can be structured to create maximum fear, maximum anxiety, frustration, anger, depression, the more we, at the electromagnetic level, drop into the frequency range that is represented by those emotional states, i.e. the frequency ranges that these entities operate at. Thus, there can be a frequency connection, and there can be not only a parasiting, a vampiring of our energy field as their food source, which is what the ancients talked about, but also it can come the other way in terms of dictating our sense of reality. While we think we're thinking and feeling something that is of our own generation, actually it's coming from another force. And throughout, whether it's religion or whatever, there's this massive common theme, Sean, as we all know, throughout history, of this process of possession. And this is how it happens. Well, when you open your heart, when you're in a state of love, when you're in a state of compassion, when you're in a state of integrity, your vibrational state rises to the frequency level that is represented by those states, and never the twain shall meet. You become unpossessable because you're not in the frequency range that they can access. It's like being on two different television stations or radio stations. So if we...
That's why, Dave, I want to leave it at that, because that's exactly, I think, what the lip with your buzzsaw and what the people's voice is exactly trying to achieve. And I think that's a point that I really want to leave it at, which is to say that we're trying to raise that state above that level of fear and that trap that you described so well, that is a way of possession, a way of keeping people enslaved. It is through that lower frequency. And what we're going to be, what you'll be doing with people's voice, what we're trying to do now is exactly an elevation to that level of consciousness, which is knowledge, which is love, which empowers, right? And then we can, gradually, we'll be able to free mankind. That is our long-term goal.
Yeah, and that's why, Sean, that in the alternative arena, we have to open our minds to all possibility. and not allow ourselves to be in our little box while pointing out that the population as in general are in their little box, because we have to have no boxes. We are infinite awareness, infinite consciousness. It does not have a box. It is infinite.
Yeah.
Thus is unboxable. And if you are in a belief system that is dictating your sense of reality, and you are editing information received to make sure that your belief system survives, then I don't care where you are in the alternative arena. You might be more awake than the general population, but you're still in the box. And we've all got to get out of them and realize that, if we respond in the alternative media to what is happening with anger, with aggression, with fear, which often the former two are an expression of, then we are playing in the field of frequency that is actually manipulating reality, therefore can manipulate us.
Yeah.
We've got to go beyond it. And it's not New Age. It's not New Age nonsense and New Age, all that stuff. It's simple, basic metaphysics.